Michigan State has been a thorn in the Buckeyes' side for decades and decades when it means something. What's going to happen this Saturday? We'll talk about it here on Buckeyes Live, as we always do. From the top, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeyes Scoop, Kevin Noon from Buckeyes Scoop as well, and Steve Hellwagon, senior Big Ten writer there at 247 Sports. Bucknuts. Gentlemen, 2 games left. That's it. Short college football season, as always.
Yeah, it flies by sometimes.
This season has gone right on by, no doubt about it.
All right. Still games to be played that matter. I do enough of these with other teams. I know you guys aren't familiar, but that have to like play out the string, play meaningless games.
All those poor people.
It's kind of a drag.
They're just volunteers.
Never the problem here. The Florida States and Nebraskas of the world. Yes, we have to like treat the season like the off season about 6 games in.
I got a note off on my picks this past week, the Florida State-Miami game I put in there. I remember when this was a big deal. And then I said, yes, I'm over 52. You know.
Whoa.
Woo. Zing. Right. Got you, Miami people. Got you. Well, Florida State got you, didn't they? Huh. How about that?
And they did.
How about that?
4th and 14 this year instead of a wide right or wide left. Okay, who else gotcha is Ohio State gotcha, one of the best safeties in the country. Kevin, depending on your service, one of the 2 best in a legacy commit, Sonny Styles.
Yeah, absolutely. Is he a safety? Is he a linebacker? Does he grow into a rush end? I mean, I just put him down as a defensive player because we really don't know where he's going to be. 6'4", 215, according to some of the databases. He's certainly going to fill out. I remember going to the Ohio State camp and saw him work out with every different position group on the defensive side of the ball. Ohio State will just kind of figure it out. I mean, I think right now at this point, you look at him maybe as a bullet, but you know, he's a class of 2023. He's got some time, even though he looks like he could suit up today and go out there and play. Notre Dame certainly felt good with his older brother playing there, but dad was an Ohio State Buckeye. And, you know, the timing maybe a little surprising. The commitment not surprising to me. I know Notre Dame fans really thought that they were going to be able to pull this one, but he's not the same guy as his brother. I think he wanted to stay closer to home. I think he wanted to kind of pick up dad's legacy, and it's a huge get.
No doubt. I'll throw in, I agree with Kevin. I think a lot of people on the Notre Dame side of this felt he was just going to follow blindly in his brother's footsteps, but that's certainly not the case. And the sense that I got was that every Ohio State there's been since you were able to get back on campuses, including several of the camp days back in the summer, Styles was at Ohio State. Now, he also went to Notre Dame, but he was really a fixture, I thought, at a lot of the Ohio State events. And so I see a guy, and moreover, what I see is a remaking of the defense. And it can't come soon enough. I don't think there's enough blue chip talent on that side of the ball, either on the roster or coming in with recruiting. I think this is a failing of an offensive-minded head coach who took the job and subconsciously, perhaps, just accentuated getting receivers and offensive linemen and quarterbacks and running backs, and not worried so much about, we lost out on a 5-star defensive back. We lost out on a 5-star defensive end, defensive tackle. And now you're seeing that kind of change a little bit. I think they understand that you got to have 5-star talent on both sides of the ball if you want to play for a national championship. They got the 2 great linebackers in the 2022 class with C.J. Hicks and Gabe Powers coming in, presumably this winter, this spring. They could come in and I wouldn't say necessarily start next year, but, you know, push to start next year. And then the following year, Sonny Styles could come in. I don't see him as a safety either. I think he's a middle linebacker, an outside linebacker, or a defensive end. And I will leave it to Al Washington and Larry Johnson and whoever's calling the defense to sort that out. So tremendous get for Ohio State psychologically. Top 10 national player, again from Pickerington, different high school than Jack Sawyer, who went to Pickerington North. This is Pickerington Central. And Pickerington Central has sent kids everywhere, including the Hamilton brothers, to Ohio State. And Xavier Henderson, I think, is from Pick Central, who they're going to be playing against this Saturday with Michigan State, outstanding safety. So good to get back in there and get another blue chip player. Last thing, Pick Central is playing against Upper Arlington. Upper Arlington's 13-0. Pick Central's 12-1. I presume the game will be on Spectrum, Ohio, Friday night at 7 o'clock, a regional final from Westerville Central. Should be a huge crowd and one of the biggest games in Central Ohio in recent memory.
That's one to tune in for. Yeah, I'm with these guys. I don't see a safety here, because anytime you have a 6'4" safety in high school, rarely do they become a 6'4" safety in college. And where does that put him? It just puts him on the field somewhere. Ryan Day has talked about how just in the last week he was asked about talking about the hybrid offensive players. You've got like Kyle Pitts and say Curtis Samuel from 2016 can run the ball, can catch the ball. Kyle Pitts can run like a receiver, can play tight end. You've got these hybrid players on offense. So you're going to move more towards hybrid players on defense. And eventually there's going to be you've got some positionless stuff going on with defense. And it's like, what position does he play? As Kevin said, he plays defense. And maybe he's rushing the quarterback on one play. Next play, he could be dropping back as a deep safety. We saw Isaiah Simmons do that, which I think is the most common comparison that people who have seen Sonny Styles will use, and those who project him, because again, you're not going to project him as a free safety, but he can do that from time to time, just as Pete Warner did in 2019. You're not going to ask it every time, but he has the ability to do those things. So I think it's huge. It's a good way to get the 2023 class rolling. Legacy kid, so he already understands what Ohio State is about and can convey that to others as well, which I understand he's already been doing as a recruit to other recruits. So it's one of those guys where I think Kevin said it on one of our previous podcasts. He's not a can't miss, but he's a guy that like you have to you need him. You can't let him get to somewhere else. And I forget exactly how you said it, Kevin. You said it much better than I did, but you can't let him get away for everything he can do. And you also don't want to have to play against him down the road.
Incredible insight and knowledge and information, storytelling, all that we get here each and every week from these three on Buckeyes Live. So lock it in. Understand that we're here every Wednesday at 1:30 Eastern time, but at the same time, we've got 4 schedules to coordinate. So sometimes we've got to switch up. So please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeyes Scoop, Kevin Noon from Buckeyes Scoop, and Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts 247. I would encourage everybody with Michigan State, Michigan, a Big Ten championship game, most likely, we believe, and bigger things beyond that in store. This is the time to lock it in with these three and all the insight that they provide here and at their respective platforms. So, Steve, that Purdue game was basically the Buckeyes finishing off drives and taking advantage of Purdue not being on their A game with a few mistakes and taking what I thought was a ridiculous line. I was wrong, 21 points, and just obliterating it against a team that's not looked bad against anybody.
Yeah, it was quite a telling performance, I think, by Ohio State, and at least offensively, where the 2 weeks prior, Nebraska and Penn State, they had struggled in the red zone and only scored 2 offensive touchdowns in those games. They scored 59 points in this game. I think it was 8. Was it 8 offensive touchdowns, I guess? I don't know. But at any rate, a whole bunch of touchdowns, lots and lots of them. I know C.J. Stroud threw for 5 and Travion Henderson ran for 2 and Garrett Wilson ran for 1. So, yeah, it was it all adds up, 8 touchdowns. They scored touchdowns the first 6 times they had the ball, and it's hard to be any more efficient than that. Then they kicked a field goal the 7th time and then had a touchdown the 8th time they had the ball. So it was, in a sense, as good an offensive performance as you're going to see. And to me, they got off to a great start, which is what they had done, obviously, when they played Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana. They had gotten out to a great start in those games, and now against Purdue they did. They didn't get off to a great start against Penn State or Nebraska and kind of sputtered, and those games went all the way down to the wire before Ohio State was able to put them away. So to me, offense, give them an A- or an A+ for that game. Defense, there were a lot of issues, and it wasn't that they I think the last 2 weeks have illustrated some past defense problems for the Buckeyes. They gave up 2 big passes against Nebraska, one of them for a touchdown, the other one set up a touchdown. And then this past week, they gave up a lot of medium-sized chunk plays. I think the longest one was 27 or 29 yards for a touchdown, but there were several other 20-yard plays, and Purdue, with their outstanding pass offense, was able to sustain drives and convert in the red zone. So that had to be very troubling, I think, for Ohio State. I mean, the only positive thing you can say is, unlike Nebraska, they didn't give up the 50-yarder, but on the flip side, they still gave up a bunch of points and a bunch of yards, and that's not going to be acceptable as they get deeper into this. And you don't want to get into a shootout with Michigan State or Michigan, obviously, so and whoever else you might play after that. So I think there are some deep concerns. People, see, they scapegoat a lot of the players on defense who made mistakes. But as I looked at the snap count from the game, the coaches have pretty much spoken on who's going to play. Bryson Shaw played all 72 plays of that game at safety. So it's not a case where, one, the coaches believe they've got anybody better behind him that's even worth 10 or 15 plays. And two, he's won them over somehow. I don't know, that he's kind of been there on the business end for some past defense breakdowns here in the last 2 games in particular. And I don't like singling people out when they make mistakes like that. They're all college athletes and everything. But at the same time, if you want to win the Big Ten championship, get into the playoff, and get to the national championship game, you got to shore some things up. And so they're back to the drawing board as far as I'm concerned with pass defense this week.
Well, and Ryan Day did say all of the coach things about Bryson Shaw, that he gets them lined up well, that sort of thing. They also they dropped a bunch of 8 guys in coverage and would rush 3, and I wonder how much of that is because of the concern at safety. We know they've scrapped essentially the single high and gone with 2 high, and they ran some cover 2, and they've dropped some guys. How much of that is protecting Bryson Shaw? And people say get him off the field or whatever. There's nobody else at this point. Like Lathan Ransom was not the answer. The only other answer at this point is Cameron Martinez, Marcus Hooker, and obviously Bryson Shaw has a better understanding of where everybody needs to be, and he understands the defense. Now, sometimes he's not getting to where he needs to be, and he knows that. He said he's made mistakes. Others have as well. But at this point, you have to, I guess, not hide him, but understand that's what your defense now has. Try to figure out how to work around that, because he's going to be out there. And so, whether that's dropping more in coverage and asking more of your defensive line. And this may have just been, I think this was also just a product of they're facing a team that's going to throw the ball 50 times. We are now up 28 points. Let's just keep everything in front of us. Don't get beat deep. Make them earn and drive and burn that clock as much as they can. And I think there is something to be said for not giving up big plays, but also they were dropping everybody. And so they were okay with giving up small plays, knowing that they're not going to be stopped. Like Ohio State's offense is not going to be stopped 4 times in a row and suddenly the game is tied. So I think Ryan Day had that confidence. I do wonder what would happen if they were to have been more aggressive against Purdue. I don't know if that would have made things better or made things worse.
Yeah, you can't change the engine on the plane once it's already taken off at this point. They're going to have to ride with the pieces that they have, and that's what it's going to be. And whether or not you have to do some things to try and minimize exposure, that's what you kind of have to do. And as Steve had said, there weren't really any huge hits in terms of long plays. The long play, Milton Wright had a 29-yard reception. There were 5 guys that had 20-yard receptions. No run went longer than 11. So Ohio State really just tried to keep everything in front of it. So it was a little bit of a death by 1,000 paper cuts there. But, when Ohio State puts up 59 points, that cures a lot of issues at that point. But, it'll be, not to get ahead of ourselves, but it'll be a different game against Michigan State. It'll be a different game against Michigan. It'll be different all the rest of the way because, honestly, Aiden O'Connell is a better quarterback in terms of just pure passing ability than anything Ohio State's going to see moving forward until potentially the playoffs. I think Jeff Brom is probably a more gifted offensive play caller than anything that Ohio State's going to see moving until it gets to the playoffs. So you had to kind of ride with what was happening there, and it was frustrating for Ohio State fans to see the defense take a step back. And spoiler alert, people are going to get frustrated to see what happens against Michigan State, because I think Michigan State's going to put some points up and there's going to be some frustration there. But once again, I think Ohio State's going to be able to put up a lot of points in that game. And we're going to probably be sitting in the same situation a week from today, talking about how Ohio State fantastic on offense and having, some deficiencies on defense. And, how is this team ever going to survive Michigan the following week and then wash, rinse, repeat?
That said, people are already asking who we would like to see Ohio State face in the playoffs. How about Kansas State? They would be I'd like to see them maybe, I don't know, Missouri? See them in the playoffs? That would be good. I don't know. Does anybody care at this point? Michigan State, Michigan, Wisconsin. Probably. That's a lot to get through. So.
Yeah, you got to get through those three first, obviously. I mean, and it's a I was on a show today in Oregon, and they were like, do Ohio State people care that Oregon is ranked ahead of Ohio State? And I'm like, well, they beat them at Ohio State Stadium on the road, and you have to give them credit for that. But I think Ohio State can reel them in over the next several weeks because they're going to play number 7, number 6, and now Wisconsin has snuck all the way up to number 15 in the playoff rankings or thereabouts. So that's going to be much better than what Oregon's going to face. And Oregon's got a tough game with Utah this week, where I saw Utah is favored over Oregon at Utah, which seems somewhat weird. I mean, but Oregon really hasn't been all that impressive, in the 8 weeks since they beat Ohio State. So I don't know. It's going to be it's all going to come out in the wash. I know you hate that, Mark, that it's all going to work out when it works out, or whatever it was I said that really upset you a couple of weeks ago with my dismissive tone. But
so you're going to upset me intentionally again.
Football is going to be played, and the winners are going to move on, and the losers are going to go to the Losers Bowl, and that's how it is. That's how it's
Steve,
always
do you want to give you the 57 different scenarios where it will not work itself out?
Go ahead.
So the one thing I will say, yes, the Michigan State, Ohio State situation, that will work itself out because they're all playing. That will work itself out. And there are other like situations around the country, but the whole thing may not work itself out.
Yeah, what we know is there can't be a three-way tie between Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State because there just can't be. There can be a two-way tie between any of those three with one loss, but there can't be a three-way tie. So the head-to-head winner is going to advance of whoever's tied, if there is a tie at the end, is going to advance to Indianapolis, or Ohio State's just going to win these next two and win it outright and go on to Indianapolis and face who we presume is Wisconsin. Although I think if Minnesota wins out and beats Wisconsin, maybe they would have the upper hand in that. I don't know, but it's going to be interesting. I think we've got some great football coming up on paper, it seems, and we'll just see if the games play out to our expectations.
Mark,
in a few minutes.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, to answer Steve's last point there, I have worked on division scenarios, championship race scenarios. So I got the Big Ten West right in front of me, but I'm going to produce a video to sort all that out. The most bizarre path is Purdue. They need to win out. They need Wisconsin to lose 2. They need Iowa to lose 1, and they need Minnesota to lose, but Minnesota can't lose to Wisconsin. They need to lose to Indiana this week. That's the Purdue path to Indianapolis.
Well, they ain't going because Minnesota is going to beat Indiana like 50-10 because Indiana is completely. They've done everything but put the helmets and the shoulder pads away. I don't know.
That's the only way Indiana is going to keep Purdue out of the Big Ten championship game is by losing to Minnesota rather than beating Purdue.
Yeah.
But Mark, I just want to say it will work itself out when the committee gets together and they decide that head-to-head is acceptable for two teams and not acceptable for two other teams. That works itself out, Mark. That's exactly what we're talking about. It's simple. I don't know why you get all up in arms.
I do get up in arms like nothing else. This is the thing that gets me. So now that we've taken it down the playoff rankings path, I made this analogy, and if I made it here, somebody shut me up before I continue it, but I made it one other time that if I'm $50,000 in credit card debt and I keep getting bills sent to my mailbox and they keep stacking up, but I don't have the money to pay it, it's going to work itself out. Somebody's going to come drag me off somewhere and throw me in jail eventually. It'll work itself out. That's going to be the conclusion. So, Tony, here's the deal, is that Oregon, for people like me that want to honor the head-to-head, it's never been so difficult than it is now. This has challenged my stance on head-to-head like nothing else, because if the committee wants to honor Ohio State's resume, they could have done it the first week. They could have said, well, this is better already. They can pull that trigger at any time. There's no magical formula. It could be the Michigan State game could be enough to say, we're going to pass them by. Or they could never do it and say, Oregon, we're going to honor the head-to-head as long as they're both 12-1. But that's created the logjam or the conundrum. I never use that word, because if you're honoring the head-to-head, you either say, we think Ohio State's this good and they need to be as high as possible, therefore we're placing Oregon in front of them, and then we've got to place all these other teams behind them. Or you say, you use Oregon as your starting point and say, they're really not that good, so we're going to place them back here behind Cincinnati, Michigan, Michigan State, and others, and then Ohio State's got to be placed behind them in the back of the line. So that's where we stand right now.
Well, on the teleconference with Gary Barta and the CFP committee last night, the last week, Barta cited the fact that Oregon and Ohio State had similar wins that week. They were good. They weren't impressive. And so they went back to the head-to-head for those two teams. This week, it was, Ohio State had a good win. Oregon won at home against Washington State, but really not enough separation. So they went back to the head-to-head again, even though Ohio State had a much more, a better, a win over a ranked opponent, more emphatic, but they still went back to that head-to-head. And this week they also were talking about Alabama, Oregon, and Ohio State and trying to put them in the right order. So now Oregon and Ohio State have invoked Alabama in the committee's eyes. So obviously, as Gary Barta said, we didn't learn much about Alabama, but they still like them most. And it just, I think here eventually they cited Ohio State's wins. Their best wins were Penn State, Purdue, Minnesota. Oregon just has a better win right now also, and it's over Ohio State. And they also have a Fresno State win, which is like Ohio State's other wins. And they have a UCLA win, which is like Ohio State's other win. So the problem with Ohio State right now is they didn't play Ohio State, and Oregon did. Now, moving forward, they're going to play more teams like Ohio State. They're going to play Michigan State. If they beat them, that will be a better win than anything Oregon has, except for Ohio State. But it will now raise Ohio State up more. They beat Michigan, going to raise them up even more. So I believe they will, if they don't pass Oregon, if they beat Michigan State, I think they will pass Oregon. And if they don't, they will certainly pass them after they beat Michigan. And this is assuming like Oregon has to go on the road and win at Utah. So that might be a good enough win to keep Oregon where they are. But again, it just also comes down to what they want, because we saw that with Michigan State when Michigan State beats them, and they were already talking that week, who is better between these two teams? There's no way to tell.
Yeah, my belief on how this was all supposed to work was that the head-to-head was when you were comparing two teams that were very similar. Well, apparently they don't think Michigan and Michigan State are very similar because they threw head-to-head out the window on that one. But when you look at Ohio State and Oregon, apparently they're saying that they are very similar teams. And okay, let me get my Reynolds Wrap hat and put it on right now about how Penn State couldn't get itself ranked even when it was close, and how Purdue did not stay in the rankings, falling from 19 out at this point. But all hail that 6-4 Mississippi State team that's there for whatever reason. But I think so many people are they're just going crazy about the head-to-head when that isn't supposed to be the first metric. The first metric of their charter is not supposed to be, let's look at the head-to-head, and then we'll go from there. That's, it's supposed to be something to help differentiate two teams that are so similar that you're really trying to find something to be able to put one on a line above the other one. And, there just seems to be this misinformation campaign that the first metric is head-to-head when it really shouldn't be. When you sit there and you look at what a Big Ten schedule is, and I'm the first one to admit it. Ohio State, they played some guys, but their schedule is backloaded. Michigan State and Michigan, and then whatever a Big Ten championship game would be if they get into it. That's the meat of the schedule at that point. But Lordy, the Pac-12 schedule is Charmin soft.
Yeah, it's awful.
The Murph man just arrived here at the shot. He says hello to everybody.
Hey, Pat. Did we lose Kevin there?
No, he's still there.
Oh, okay. He just ended his statement very abruptly. So I'll say that,
like that.
For me, Penn State, Purdue, and Minnesota are better than anything on Oregon's schedule by far. Those three teams, especially Penn State, could go out to the Pac-12 and probably win the conference. And certainly the Purdue game was just an annihilation versus what Oregon's doing right now. So if anything, my argument would be that the committee should reverse its two head-to-head decisions. Michigan and Michigan State have played like opponents, same opponents. They have very similar performances against those teams, meaning Michigan State ripped Rutgers. Michigan barely beat them, but then Michigan decidedly beat Indiana. Michigan State barely beat if you factor all those out, they pretty much come out as a wash. So then why not go to the head-to-head with Michigan State as opposed to Ohio State, Oregon? Yes, the Ducks won the game very clearly, but then they went and they separated, and they are playing different levels of football now.
I think the difference is the resume is not entirely identical when you look at offensive and defensive rankings. I mean, Michigan State's 130th nationally in pass defense, and I think the difference between Ohio State, Oregon, and Michigan State was Oregon won on the road, whereas Michigan State, they were down 30-14, and they found a way to win at home, 37-33. Home is different than road, I think, and a better accomplishment for Oregon. So I'm not all that wrapped around the axle about Michigan being one spot ahead of Michigan State. To hear them talk about it, it's like a virtual tie, and Michigan's overall resume trumps the head-to-head by infinitesimal decimal points, and somebody's got to be 6 and somebody's got to be 7. And moreover, it means nothing today because if they both win out, then I don't know. You'll have to make a decision, I guess. If they both win out, Michigan State's going to the Big Ten championship game and would have an extra data point. And ultimately, if they win that game, would finish ahead of Michigan, no question. So, again, going to come out in the wash and not worth getting wrapped around the axle with 2 weeks to play.
Now we've got Michigan State at the shoe as a 19-point underdog, one of the top 5, 6, 7 teams in the country. That's just astounding to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Buckeyes covered. I don't think they will. It's probably going to be my pick on Patreon, folks, $5 a month. So anyway, Tony, we've got a long history of Michigan State jumping up and bringing down great Ohio State teams. 1973, 98, 13-15. I missed one in there somewhere. And here we go. Michigan State's playing for a championship itself, so it's not all about Ohio State. How do you see this matchup?
19 seems like a lot as well, and it seemed like a lot last week, and we saw how that went. Hearing some people talking from inside Michigan State where they feel like Ohio State might be able to do what they want in this one, and so that starts to make you think Ohio State's going to be able to throw the ball pretty well, depending on the weather. We'll see what it is on Saturday. I don't know what it's supposed to be right now, but this is if you contain Kenneth Walker, can Peyton Thorne beat you? He has good receivers, and he can beat you, but will he? Will the accuracy be there, or will he be a 55% thrower that day rather than a 70% thrower? And you just don't know. I think the one constant that you do know is that Ohio State will be able to move the ball, will be able to score, and then it always comes back to how many points would Ohio State have to give up to lose. Last week they gave up 31, and it was never in doubt. And would 31 put a scare into Ohio State this week? More so than last week, I think, but I still think 31 probably still looking at like a 45-31, and I'm not sure Michigan State scores 31. I think Ohio State's run defense is one of the best rush defenses in the nation. They've shown that. Purdue was able to run the ball a little bit on them, but that's because they were dropping 3 or dropping 8 and just allowing Purdue to, sure, if you want to run the ball, go ahead. Michigan State's going to try to do it. Ohio State's going to have to stop them. And if Ohio State can't control the line of scrimmage, then you've got a problem. But even then, is it, Ohio State 38-34? Like, I feel like Ohio State's offense will be able to overcome what the defense does. It's going to be a fun one. But I'm thinking probably a couple touchdowns in Ohio State's favor rather than, fourth quarter final drive type of game.
Yeah, I'm conflicted just as well. On one hand, Ohio State takes care of business at Ohio Stadium typically. Other than the Oregon game, you have to go back a long way to when somebody played them real tight at Ohio Stadium. It doesn't happen very often. And on the other hand, on the same hand, I look at Michigan State's pass defense. They gave up 500 yards to Purdue. C.J. Stroud's already got 400-yard games, and he's got an array of wide receivers to throw the ball to. And so, to my way of thinking, Ohio State could very well throw for 400 yards in this game and probably rush for 150 or 200 yards as well. So they could really put it on Michigan State if they get off to a fast start and get everything going and find a way to contain Walker in the run game. I think Michigan State, conversely, is going to attack Ohio State's pass defense, which has been suspect the last couple of weeks with Peyton Thorne. He's got Naylor and Reed, some pretty good wide receivers out there. And Walker, Ohio State's done really well against the run on the whole. We'll see if Ohio State can contain Walker in the running game. He had 197 yards and 5 touchdowns against Michigan in that win by Michigan State. So that was a command performance by him. So I am conflicted on this. I probably think it's something in the 41-24 range, something like that, just as a first thought. But, I could be persuaded either way. To sit here and say I would put my house on the plus 19 or the minus 19, I don't think I would. This is not a game where I'm sitting here saying I got to absolutely load up on this side or the other. I would say predominantly if it was number 4 against number 7, you'd think it wouldn't be a blowout, but it very well could be. I mean, if Ohio State's hitting on all cylinders like they were this past week, and there's no reason why to think Purdue's going to slow them down, because I've watched some videotapes, and what's crazy is that quarterbacks will hold the ball for 5, 6, 7 seconds, and then some guy will make a sliding catch 30 yards downfield, and you're like, my God, how did that happen? Oh, it's Michigan State secondary. They're not very good. So, yeah, it leaves a lot to be desired. I'll just say that.
Yeah, if I'm loading up on anything, it's the over. I mean, I think that this is going to be a high-scoring game. I really do. And then again, we sit there and we're like, oh, it's going to be a high-scoring game. It ends up being, 17-16. Oh, it's going to be a low-scoring game. Ends up being 42-39. We've seen how those things work. But I like Ohio State probably to get into the 50s, honestly, because I have no faith in that Michigan State secondary, and I think that they're going to be able to run the ball. I look at, Maryland ran for 101, Purdue ran for 58, Michigan only ran for 146, but then Michigan ends up throwing for 406 in that game. I like Ohio State's chances to really push this defense, but I think that Michigan State's going to score a lot more points than people are saying. I heard somebody throw 31 in here. I think 31 sounds like about a right number. I think it could be something like 52-31, to be quite honest. I know I bang this drum every single week in Tail of the Tape about how Ohio State is a balanced offense, 196 yards, 197 yards rushing, over 350 passing, which of course, that's not super balanced, but when it's 30th rushing offense and sixth passing offense, that's very different than when Michigan comes in with the 77th passing offense and the 13th rushing offense, or when you look here in Nebraska, Nebraska's about the closest thing that they play to a balanced offense. So I think that Ohio State's going to be able to do a lot of things to take Michigan State out of its game. I think the X factor that's going to determine if it's going to be 31 points or it's going to be 14 points for Sparty is going to be what Ohio State does against Kenneth Walker.
So with Nebraska, you mean balanced offense, meaning marginal running and marginal passing?
That's still balanced.
Okay. So, Tony, if you're looking at a box score, if we can show you just a couple lines from a box score after this game, what are you looking for?
Kenneth Walker's total yards, total rushing yards, and maybe the same with Travion Henderson. It might be one of those things where whoever outrushes the other, that would give you a pretty good idea. But because we've seen CJ Stroud throw for 400 yards in a loss already, and we've seen Dwayne Haskins do that. So, passing yards doesn't necessarily measure wins. It can also be a signature of desperation. So I think it's give me the yards per carry of Kenneth Walker and Travion Henderson. And if Travion Henderson is 3 yards more per carry than Kenneth Walker, I like the Buckeyes' chances quite a bit. And like Kevin said, the passing game is going to happen whether or not Michigan State likes it. So, that is what it is, but it's going to be about converting down in the red zone and making those tough yards. And that's where Mayan Williams also gets involved.
What are your most telling stat lines, Kevin?
I'm going to be looking at Michigan State's third down conversion percentage, because Michigan State is converting about 38% of the time. They're 76th in the nation. If Michigan State goes closer to 50%, we're going to be in for much more of a game than anticipated. I'm also looking at Michigan State's red zone offense and defense. Neither of them are particularly fantastic, both in the 60s nationally, which is right in about the middle in terms of having 130 FBS teams. Those are, I know that it would be a lot easier to just be able to extrapolate off of, this guy ran for this or this guy threw for this. But I think some of those numbers there are going to be important. And then I also am going to be curious about Ohio State's penalties. Ohio State's been Ohio State's own worst enemy at times, having drives get cut short because of procedural calls. If Ohio State can play a clean game, I like Ohio State's chances to win this one pretty big.
And maybe if you see Kenneth Walker's line and it's impressive from a yardage per carry standpoint, but it's only 13 to 16 carries, maybe he ripped off a couple nice runs and Michigan State was in it at 14 all, but then it suddenly became 38-14 and he was taken out of the game and he went 13 carries for 112, but it was ineffective after halftime. Versus if he gets 32 for 187, then those 32 carries may chew up a lot of time and keep CJ Stroud on the sideline.
Yeah, even if it's 32 for 140, just the fact that you've had the ball, that you're able to convert those, as Kevin said, the third downs, because you're not carrying the ball 32 times without converting some third downs. So, yeah, that's another key stat. Just how many times do they actually give the ball to Kenneth Walker? Because if it's 13, that's bad. If it's 30, that may not be enough to win, but it tells you that Michigan State is at least controlling a little bit of the clock, a little bit of the line of scrimmage. but also, again, it may only lead to 24 points at that point.
And much like Michigan or Ohio State, Michigan State doesn't really put out a too deep, so not sure what their health is, but if they don't have Jalen Naylor, I think at receiver, I think that's going to be a big hit. They didn't have their starting left tackle last week against Maryland, and also they went and got one of the biggest players out of the transfer portal from Tennessee, that linebacker Crouch, and he didn't play either. So if they are down a couple of guys, things can get really dicey really fast.
Yeah, also missing a defensive tackle and a corner, and I think their kicker was also out as well. And he's, of course, not – Tucker's not going to talk about who will or won't be here. I just looked in an article, and he said he told his team, if you can play, please play, essentially. Like, if you can go, let's go this week.
We're begging you.
Mm-hmm. And if you can't, you can't.
Yakov's super chat contribution, thank you so much for that, has spurred on some debate in the live chat concerning best Big Ten quarterback. Purdue's Aiden O'Connell better than Peyton Thorne and Cade McNamara. David Greenshield was asking us for the second best quarterback in the Big Ten. I think he's making an assumption there that C.J. Stroud is number one. Tony, do you find it difficult evaluating C.J. Stroud against some of these other quarterbacks that you've faced, just because, like, I'll take Cade McNamara's best game. He played lights out against Michigan State. Like, he was making ridiculous throws, NFL kind of throws, anticipating tight windows, the whole deal. C.J. Stroud just seems to be throwing to guys that are wide open all the time.
Well, and it is interesting. Although I will remind you that Cade McNamara threw the game-clinching interception against Michigan State as well on a great play.
He got duped. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, could Cade McNamara be doing what C.J. Stroud is doing at Ohio State? I think they would ask different things of him. I don't think they can ask everything they ask of C.J. Stroud. The downfield stuff, Michigan doesn't ask much of that. Just charting some of his passing over the course of the last month. I mean, he had 1 week where his 20 completions traveled a total of 20 yards downfield before, that's, an average of 1 yard downfield per throw. And that's not going to be anything that C.J. Stroud or Ohio State will do over the course of the game. They have their jet sweeps, Ohio State does, and any quarterback can do that, of course. I think the thing that I like about C.J. Stroud more than anybody else in the Big Ten is his consistency. And we can see moments of greatness from pretty much many of the other starting quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Taulia Tagovailoa, Aiden O'Connell, Sean Clifford, even Adrian Martinez at times. Peyton Thorne has had some good games. Cade McNamara, you mentioned, throw for 400 yards. But they can't do it week after week after week. And at some point there's going to be just like a downfall, a bad game. I'm looking, Aiden O'Connell against Wisconsin completed, 75% of his passes, but just for 200 yards, threw 3 interceptions and 1 touchdown in that 30-13 loss. So, like, he's had some really good moments, but just the consistency. Even when C.J. Stroud lost, he threw for 480 some yards. So, like, he was able to do some stuff. And it's not all open receivers, obviously, but yes, he does have more open receivers than anybody else. But he's also putting in a position for those open receivers to do something with the ball, or just, he's hitting them. Credit him for that. Please, Mark, give C.J. Stroud some credit for something.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out a stat here, and I've got it. I just have to. McNamara didn't throw all the passing yardage in that game against Michigan State. Where's that? He's got 1883. So 20.3% of all of Cade McNamara's passing yardage came in that one game for this season. So 1/5, a little bit more than 1/5 of his passing yardage came in that one game. Now, I'm not going to sit there and short him and say, oh, well, that's just an outlier. But you look at McNamara's numbers. I mean, yeah, he has 2 interceptions, but he only has 237 pass attempts, whereas C.J. Stroud has 311. Peyton Thorne has 273. I mean, he's significantly down the chart on everybody. McNamara's less than a 63% passer. Peyton Thorne is a 63.4% passer. CJ Stroud is 68.8. And, going back to the super chat question, Aiden O'Connell is 72.4%. Now, his touchdown to interception ratio is not great at 2-1, 16-8. But he's slinging it around. He's got a pretty decent efficiency rating. But who is the second best quarterback in the Big Ten? I don't know. Maryland's guy certainly looks good at throwing for 310 and a half. Granted, he's 2-1 touchdowns to interceptions. O'Connell, we already talked about. Clifford, 17 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, but he's throwing sub 63%. So I don't know. I mean, I just think that sometimes it's just a matter of what the offense looks like. And Maryland's got a very pass-friendly offense. Obviously, Purdue is only passing. But, I wouldn't go too far off of Yakov's statement that Aiden O'Connell, in terms of just being a pure quarterback, might be the second best quarterback in the conference.
If the Big Ten coaches were able to draft quarterbacks, any Big Ten quarterback, if CJ Stroud is number one, how far down the list is Kyle McCord? Where does he go in that list? Because I think we know Kyle McCord could do some big things at Ohio State and would be doing some big things right now. If he had won the job, then he'd be putting up these numbers. Just, we're not even talking about him, but I'm sure any coach would take him. Now, would they take him over Aiden O'Connell, or even JJ McCarthy would be another guy that might be higher than some of these starters. But in terms of Cade McNamara, this past week he was 19 of 29 passing, but only 5 of 12 on passes more than 5 yards downfield. That's not far. So there's some things there that I think been talking about this on podcasts as well. When Ohio State and Michigan play, Ohio State's vulnerable a little bit further down the field than 5 yards. Like, throw the ball a little bit, throw the ball over the linebackers in front of the safeties. That's where they're vulnerable. Can Cade McNamara do that? He can sometimes, but he's more comfortable throwing it closer to the line of scrimmage. And I think that suits Ohio State's defense a little bit better.
Well, it might take Eric all 20 minutes to run that long route. So, and we've determined that might be their best pass catcher.
As long as the defenders run into each other on that mesh route, it's unstoppable.
This Ohio State offense, boy, when it's clicking, when TreVeyon Henderson came around that corner on the second touchdown of the game, that was, we've seen a lot out of him already, but that against a Big Ten secondary, to split that when they all had the angle on him and he came around the corner and just split that entire secondary, that was something else, Tony.
That was as fast as I've ever seen him, and I tweeted that, and it's like, to see him just continue to split defenders, it's like watching the Millennium Falcon, fly through the, getting through the teeth of that space worm on the asteroid. Or any type of time the Millennium Falcon is trying to fly through stuff, and he just continues to get through just in time. Maybe, I don't know, if it had been like, say, 21 years ago, the Millennium Falcon may have been a better nickname for TreVeyon Henderson as we approach the new millennium. But here we are 20 years later, and we're going to have to name him after something other than a movie from 45 years ago, I guess. Can we call him The Godfather?
That hurts. Talking about how old that movie is.
Folks, play nice in the chat. They're getting certain complaints from people, and I always hate seeing complaints when I don't see actually what was written that offended someone, because it could be legit or it could be people just being a little overly sensitive. So just play nice and just talk about college football.
What was the deal with Pitt and Ohio State fans getting into it on Twitter about what?
I saw something about a transfer, and that would have been Ryan Jacoby. I mean, Ryan Jacoby, good kid, wasn't going to probably see a lot of PT at Ohio State. I'm hoping for the best for him at Pitt. I enjoy watching Kenny Pickett. I think Pitt's a fun team to watch. I don't go out of my way to watch them, but when they're on, I mean, I'll put them on the flip.
Even though the ACC's been removed from the college football playoff conversation, I think it's going to be enjoyable watching a competitive game against, two decent teams, whether that's Pitt and Wake Forest, let's say. Throw it around all over the field and give us a 48-45 game that's fairly meaningless on the national front, but will be fun to watch, and somebody gets a trophy.
Looking forward to Pitt versus Wake. They can play that game every week, and it's going to be fun every single time.
Yeah, it's better than seeing Clemson beat Virginia by 40 points.
We don't need Clemson back in the ACC championship game this year. Let them take a year off, and I know they're climbing, and it might be possible, perhaps, but
they've got a tight path. Yes,
good.
I've been working on these, championship scenarios in division races.
Have you worked on the 6-way tie in the SEC West?
I have. I thought it was only a 5. I could only work on figure out a 5-way tie.
We may have had a variable that went awry last week that took 6 off the table. I know that going into the week of action last week, 6 was still available, but I think it took a lot of tumblers to keep 6 alive.
That's a shame.
I only got it to 5. Did I miss someone there? 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've got Bama's, of course, 5-1. Ole Miss is 4-2, and then you've got the 4 teams that with 3 losses. So I did not work out a way for it to end in a 6-way tie. I got to a 5-way tie. I'll have to address that again.
Mark, how are you feeling about Auburn's chances without Bo Nix against Alabama? There's a little give and take with losing Bo Nix,
Oh yeah, there is. He can run around and make you look like a fool, and then he himself plays the fool the next play. So, it's obviously not a good setup for Auburn one way or the other, Bo or no Bo, but he, of course, gives you that, wild card element that you need maybe for the upset. And Auburn's been up to the challenge many times, more so than anyone else in that conference, with another coach, of course. All right, guys. Everybody watching, whether that's live or on the replay, please understand what we've got here each and every Wednesday at 1:30 Eastern Time. Steve Hellwagon Bucknuts, no longer here today, but his insight, Tony Gerdeman, Kevin Noon, Buckeye Scoop, they do an outstanding job, and they give of their time, not just the hour that you see them here, but in terms of working out schedules and doing all the things they do to prepare for what they deliver here. So, Kevin, what you got lined up this week?
Yeah, I am working on Tale of the Tape, as I do. We do these shows on Wednesdays. I write Tale of the Tape on Wednesdays. It runs on Thursdays, probably about 5,000 words, going through some of the history of the series and just kind of what I see. Later today, I'm going to be recording a podcast with the College Football Nerds, where we're going to be talking about the upcoming game and some other things. And of course, you can always find me on Twitter at Kevin_Noon, and of course at BuckeyeScoop.com.
And you can find me at Tony Gerdeman on Twitter. Later today, I'll be recording our weekly Bold Predictions podcast on the Buckeye Weekly podcast. And other than that, I'm going to have to find something else to write about today. Probably going to look at some Michigan State Mel Tucker quotes and throw a story up tonight about what Michigan State is saying about Ohio State.
If I remember correctly, I mentioned all those historic games off the top that went Michigan State's way. I believe in a game that turned out to be a humdrum season for the Buckeyes, Ted Ginn did have kind of his coming out party against Michigan State. I recall that.
04, 3 touchdowns in that one, a slant, an end around, and the slant to end the game, the kind of the skinny post that he ended it. But 3 touchdowns. Right. I'm not sure if it was there a special teams touchdown in that one, or was it just 3 offensive? I can't remember. I do remember having that one on the DVR for a very long time. A lot of the 2004 stuff. Ted Ginn's first, I think, touchdown catch against Indiana, where it got tipped up in the air and then he grabbed it and raced into the end zone. The unfortunate thing is there was no HD back then, because you look at the Ted Ginn highlights on YouTube right now and they're just grainy as heck. It's like what back in the day when we'd have to watch, Gale Sayers highlights or whatever, and it's like black and white. I promise people, if you're too young for Ted Ginn, you could not take your eyes off of him, because you just didn't know what he was going to do. And then once he got into the open field, there was nothing else like it.
Yeah, we're watching really fast dudes all over the place every game practically. But there was just when you saw that guy, and that's why I brought that up, because here we are almost 20 years later, that the images of him running against Michigan State and that being the first time that I really got a good shot of him. I don't know what games they would have had before that didn't really stand out to me in regards to his talents, but it was that Michigan State game that I just remember. Wow, this guy he looks different than everybody else. He's just destroying angles. Everybody thinks they have an angle, but they don't. It was just fascinating and still is to this day. Kevin, any remembrances from Michigan State before we close it up?
One I'd like to forget was 2011, which is not one that we necessarily talk about, and that was during the one Luke Fickell year, and that was a 10-7 game where Ohio State scored in the last 10 seconds of the game. Yeah. Joe Boserman, 33-yarder to, I think it was Evan Spencer, and then an onside kick. That, I'll never get those 3 hours back in my life. I'll tell you, that one was that was an ugly one. I probably should find one that I enjoyed just so I can get the taste of that one out of my mouth. Certainly 17-16 in 2012 was a good one. I liked 45-7 in 2008 as well up in East Lansing.
I remember them all.
I was in the stadium for 1998. That was my senior year. That was not a great moment. I think the 2012 game, that was the moment that really brought that team together. And that was one of the defining moments of that season where they all just realized, like, who cares about a bowl game or whatever. And they just realized they were playing for themselves, for each other at that point. The 2015 game, I know it still bothers Ohio State fans. That team, as I always say, they had their national championship and they were fine with it, and they didn't seem interested in another one. So I'm one of the people who don't have that team in really high esteem, and I know I'm different about that because they were a bunch of individuals, and that's why they lost, and they didn't look like a great team even when they were playing together. And 5 or 6 guys start the season suspended. I mean, come on.
And they were so talented that even as disinterested as they were, they ran into a number 4 ranking at the end of the year at 12-1. So they were that good. That 2011 game. Oh, young Ohio State fans, imagine Ohio State not scoring the entire game until it's basically over and it's a garbage touchdown at the end of the game. Just having like 80 yards of total offense the entire game. It was just atrocious.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the box score here just to have it. It was going to say Ohio State ran for 35 yards and threw for 143. Your leading rusher was Jordan Hall, 18 carries for 45 yards, a long of 9.
I'll liken that to a game roughly 25 years earlier, 1987, Earl Bruce's last year. The Buckeyes ran some kind of trick play on, I believe, the first play of the game, or maybe it just seemed like a trick play at the time. It was like a play action pass, and they threw it like 75 yards. Tom Tupa to I don't remember whom, and that was it for the rest. That was a Michigan State team that went on and won the Rose Bowl. They were really good defensively. Percy Snow at linebacker, and Ohio State didn't score the rest of the game, couldn't move the ball, lost 13-7. That was that awful 6-4-1 team that couldn't score every week and went on that downward spiral.
The trick play of throwing the ball down the field.
That's pretty much it, with the quarterback taking the play action with his back to the defense. That was standard Schleister, Tom Zach, Tupa, Cursados repertoire. Good stuff. Kevin Noon, Buckeye Scoop. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop. Yeah, join them both there. It's one stop, but you get twice the talent there. How amazing is that? And join us back here after the Michigan State game for Buckeyes post game, and then, of course, here next Wednesday, most likely with these two and Steve. Guys, we appreciate it. Enjoy the game. Enjoy the football this weekend.
You too. Thanks.